Howdy folks, and welcome back to World of Tanks with the mighty Jingles. This is a battle that I've had sitting around waiting to be published for quite some time, but never really got the opportunity because Christmas and New Year break. This is Circonflexes. Back to streaming World of Tanks full time. It's good to see you back, Circon. And he is driving the Object 703 version 2, which, if you believe it's World of Tanks wiki entry, is the first double-barreled tank in World of Tanks. Except it isn't. That honour actually belongs to the MTLS 1G14 Premium American, although technically Dutch, which is quite appropriate considering this is Circonflexes, Tier 3 light tank, armed with twin 37mm autocannon. It was built by the American company Marm and Harrington at the start of World War II, and they specialised in building tanks for export. And it was built at the request of the Dutch in the Dutch East Indies, although it never actually saw action. It's actually quite amusing if you look over the World of Tanks wiki page for these two tanks, because the Object 703 version 2 page quite clearly states that it's the first true double-barreled tank in World of Tanks, and if you look at the MTLS's wiki entry it says, although not anymore, it was the only tank in the game with a double-barreled gun for a very long time. You'd think that while they were editing the one entry they might have checked the other one, but it is what it is. Anyway, Object 703 version 2. Yes, do not adjust your monitors, that is a tank with two 122mm anti-tank guns mounted in the turret. And it features, as you'd probably expect, a completely unique firing system. See, unlike the MTLS at Tier 3, which by the way has never been on sale, and is an extremely rare tank, but even though it has two guns, those two guns really kind of mostly just work like one gun but with very high burst DPM, whereas here you can quite clearly see that the Object 703, being driven by Circonflexes, definitely actually has two guns that fire either independently of each other and reload independently of each other, or which can both be fired at the same time for some seriously large alpha damage. There are a couple of drawbacks to firing both of the guns at the same time, as Circonflexes has just reloaded one of them here, and he's going to use that opportunity to finish off the Carnarvon. There we go, there's his first kill. If you're going to fire both of the guns at the same time, well, first obviously they both have to be loaded, and the guns don't load simultaneously. First one loads, and then the other one. Once both guns are loaded, you then have to prep both guns for firing, which basically means you have to sit there for 3 seconds before you can fire both guns at once, and this is obviously going to leave you somewhat vulnerable. And then once they have both fired, there's a 4-second delay before the first gun starts reloading, and then once that's finished reloading, the second gun will start reloading. And don't worry, you will see an example of this later on in this replay. At the moment you can see that both guns are loaded, but there's a sort of reticle around one of the shell indicators. This tells you which of the two guns is going to fire. At the moment it's the gun on the right, which could potentially be a bit of an issue if, like Circonflexes was there, you're firing around the left-hand side of a piece of cover, so that's something that you may need to be aware of. At the moment, Circonflexes isn't under a great deal of pressure, and he's not in any rush. He's taken 2 gold ammo hits from the Carnarvon that he killed earlier, and the M103 come to the back has just been taking high explosive pot shots. And at the moment he's quite content to just sit here, keep that M1 spotted, let artillery work him over, keep poking out just to spot and make sure that there aren't any other enemy tanks creeping up, and I guarantee the ML1 is going to get tired of this long before Circonflexes or friendly artillery does. The poor old ML1 is in an incredibly tough spot. I mean, he's got cover from anybody in front of him, but he doesn't have cover from artillery, and that gap in the rocks over there ensured that he couldn't leave the cover in front of him, otherwise Circonflexes was going to get him, so it was really just a matter of time until artillery finished him off. The M103 back there is still dug into those rocks like a tick on a dog's back. There is a Centurion on the reverse slope of the hill, and they've just been joined by an E75 TS. Circonflexes, by some miracle, actually scores a hit on the M103's commander's hatch at that kind of range. That is not representative of the accuracy of these guns, by the way. That was a very lucky shot. It's not the first time he's fired at the M103, but it's the first time he's hit him. Two friendly heavies, an Emil 1951 and an Object 257 have just arrived, and Circonflexes is going to leave them to hold the rock in the centre of the pass there while he takes a shufty and see if there's anything more juicy he can sink his teeth into. And the Jaegeru over there was looking like a good candidate, and that's when he spotted the E50. There's one shot, and he actually has a shot at the Jaegeru as well. And yeah, slightly disappointing damage roll on the tier 10 tank destroyer, but still, a hit's a hit. I'm sure Circonflexes isn't going to complain too much. One of the guns is reloading, has now finished reloading, and the second gun is now reloading. Moves to the other side of the rock here, where the team is starting to take a couple of losses. Spots a side-on Jagdtiger, decides he's going to give him both barrels. There's the preparation phase. Boom! There's the kill. And as you can see, he has to wait, and now the first of the two guns starts to reload. So now you've seen the various different double-barreled gun firing, loading, and aiming mechanics in action, and I have a couple of questions about how it all works. This tank has a crew of 5. It makes do without a radio operator. The commander performs the role of the radio operator. It has one driver. It only has one gunner, but it does have 2 loaders. So when it comes to deciding to fire both guns at the same time, I can kind of understand why there's that 3-second preparation phase before both guns are capable of firing. So while it's perfectly possible for one gunner to fire both guns at the same time, you'd imagine that he wouldn't be able to aim both guns at the same time. You would have to individually check that each gun had its sights laid onto the target. But does that account for it? Because it's not as if you can actually aim one gun at one target and another gun at another target and then fire them both at the same time. If one gun's pointing in one direction, the other gun is pointing in that direction. Does each gun even have its own sight? I mean, we don't know, because nobody's ever seen the inside of this tank because it never actually existed. I can't imagine that each gun would have its own sight and the gunner would have to move from one sight or one gun to the other in order to fire them. It would make more sense for the gunner to be sitting between each gun with one sight slaved to both of them. But would there even be space for that? Because the gun breaches on these things were big. If you look at the Sherman Firefly, in order to fit the 17-pounder gun into the turret of a Sherman, they had to move the radio into a specially designed bustle sticking out of the back, and they also had to turn the gun on its side. And you can see that they've done that here with the Object 703 as well. If you look at the muzzle brake of each of the guns, you can see that the guns are in fact on their sides. And given that you do have 2 of these 122mm gun breaches inside the turret, it would be completely impractical to suggest that the gunner would have to move from one side of the turret to the other just to aim and fire each gun individually. So it would make sense to think that the gunner himself was actually situated in between the 2 gun breaches, rather than having to manoeuvre himself around what must be an extremely cramped turret in order to get from one gun to the other. But, well, then again, look at how close those guns are together. How would you physically fit somebody between the breaches of 2 guns that are as close together as that inside a tank turret? You certainly wouldn't be able to fit the gunner to the rear of the breach. Those breaches recoil. He'd get to fire one gun once and then he would be an extremely flat and dead gunner. So with the breaches of those 2 guns taking up the majority of the centre of the turret, where would the gunner actually sit in order to operate both of the guns? Perhaps they put him in the radio operator's position, considering that there is no radio operator in this tank and the commander takes on that job. I'm sure mechanically that could be made to work. But why does it take him 3 seconds to aim both guns if he's not actually physically at the guns, because there's no space inside the turret for him to do that, and he therefore would only have one sight that would control both of the guns and 2 triggers? Why does it take him 3 seconds to pull both of those triggers while looking down a single sight? Jingles, you think too much. Can you not just shut up and enjoy the game? I know, I do think too much. I lie awake at night thinking about these sort of things. And that's before we get onto the issue of loading the guns. Now, if both of these guns were installed in the turret in the traditional way, loaded from the top, it would technically be possible for one loader to cover both guns. Possible, but you wouldn't want to be that loader. I mean, you'd need arms like the Hulk. Or after a couple of days in the tank, you'd have arms like the Hulk. And that would explain why you can't load both of the guns at the same time, why they have to be loaded one after the other. But that's clearly not the case, and we can tell this for two reasons. First, just by looking at the muzzle brakes, you can tell that the guns are in fact laid onto their sides, so they would have to be loaded from the sides, and that would mean moving from one side of the turret to the other. Clearly impractical. And also, if you look at the tank's crew, while it does only have one gunner, it does have two loaders. So this kind of begs the question, why is it that when you fire both of the guns at the same time, which Circonflexes is about to do, there's the 3-second preparation before firing, both guns go off, both loaders now sit on their asses for 4 seconds, waiting for what, I'm not quite sure. Then one of the loaders recovers from the shell shock of two 122mm guns going off inside the same turret, starts loading his gun, while the other one presumably finishes off his crossword puzzle, waiting until the first loader has finished his job before he starts loading the second gun, which presumably by now he's finished his crossword puzzle and he is starting, in fact has now loaded the second gun. Which is bad news for the M103 that picked the wrong moment to finally leave cover. Second gun, ready to go. Yep, nice. So why is that? Why does one loader sit around doing nothing, waiting for the other loader to load his gun before he starts loading his own gun? Is there no ready-use ammunition stowage inside the turret? Do they have to fight over who gets access to the ammunition bin first? Are the loaders' positions in Red Army tanks determined by the seniority of the various different loaders involved, and is it considered a gross breach of military protocol to start loading your gun ahead of a loader who has seniority over you? I don't know. It's the best explanation I can think of. I can't think of a single good reason why this tank's gunner would have to sit there pondering the mysteries of life, the universe and everything for 3 seconds before pulling both triggers to fire both guns at once. And I can't think of a single practical reason that makes sense to explain why one loader would be sitting there idle with a shell in his lap, but choosing to not actually load it into the breech of his gun until the loader on the other side of the tank had done his first. Well, that's not true. I can think of one extremely good reason, and it's probably the reason that explains why this tank cannot fire both guns the second they're ready to go, and why each gun has to be loaded consecutively rather than simultaneously, because this tank is bad enough in its current form, and if it was able to do that, it would be even more overpowered than the already ridiculously overpowered IS-3A. The fact that it does have 3 seconds of vulnerability before it can unload both of these 122mm shotguns into your face is a balancing feature. The fact that it can't then immediately reload both of the guns at the same time and do it again is also obviously an artificial feature implemented into the game in order to attempt to keep this tank within the bounds of acceptability. Have they succeeded? Well, I don't know. You tell me what you think. The comments section is down below. You know what to do. The Object 703 version 2. Broken as shit or not, you be the judge. Anyway, that was Circonflexes, now full-time back in the saddle, streaming the World of Tanks on Twitch, racking up 6,000 damage, Ace Tanker, High Caliber and Top Gun in the Object 703 version 2. I hope you enjoyed it, and as always, take care, and I'll catch you next time.